Sign the deed over or burn with it, widow." None of those 4 riders knew what would cost them. Everything was already watching from the ridgeline, a quarter-mile north of Nora Callahan's fence. Still as stone, a man who had once loved her. That's where we begin tonight, partner. Late summer, 1883, Bighorn Basin, Wyoming Territory. A young widow on a small valley homestead, a cattle syndicate that wanted her land, and a quiet stranger up on that ridge who had not moved, had barely breathed, for the better part of an hour. If you're new here, take a second and hit subscribe. We tell frontier stories the way the old-timers told them, slow, honest, and all the way to the end. And I want to ask you something before we go any further. Where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Drop it in the comments. I read everyone. Now let's go back to that fence line. Nora Callahan was 26 years old. She had married Daniel Callahan at 19, followed him west from Ohio on nothing but his confidence and a box of seeds, and watched him break his back for 3 years building something worth having. Then came the early snow of 1882 and a fever that lasted 8 days. He was buried on the east slope of her pasture before November was out. His grave faced the mountains. She did not leave. That surprised people. The neighbors, what few she had in the basin, figured she'd fold up and ride east by spring. But Nora Callahan stayed through that first widow winter, and then through the one after it, and she learned by hard degrees how to do everything Daniel had done. She was not large, she was not loud, but she was stubborn in a way that the Wyoming cold could not touch, and the land was worth being stubborn for. The Callahan place sat at the throat of a narrow valley the locals called Reed's Notch, tucked between 2 long ridges that channeled snowmelt down through a series of springs even in August. The grass in that valley was green when everything around it was going brown. There was water, and where there was water in Wyoming in late summer, there was wealth, not the shouting kind, the quiet kind that builds dynasties. Harlan Fitch understood that. Harlan Fitch understood most things that had to do with land and money. He was the operating agent for the Yellowstone Cattle Syndicate, a company whose principals lived in New York and London and cared nothing about Wyoming except the revenue it mailed them. Fitch ran it from an office in Basin City, a 2-room affair that smelled of pipe smoke and coffee and the kind of ambition that does not apologize. He was 45, slim as a fence post, with a neat dark beard and fingernails that were always clean. He wore a town man's suit even when riding, and he never carried a gun himself. He didn't need to. He employed men for that. The 4 riders at Nora's fence line on this Tuesday evening in August were 3 of those men, plus one additional feature, Owen Garrick. Owen Garrick was the enforcer, which is a polite word. He was 38, thick through the shoulders, with a scar that ran from his left ear to the corner of his mouth, and gave him a permanent half-grin that had nothing to do with humor. He had been a hired gun in Texas before Fitch found him and cleaned him up some. He was good at the work in the way that some men are good at the one dark thing they were built for. The 3 behind him were named Tully, Price, and a heavy-set man everyone called the Deacon, on account of a fire and brimstone sermon he'd delivered at gunpoint once in a Laramie saloon when he was drunk. Tully was young and nervous about it. Price was not nervous about anything. The Deacon chewed tobacco and watched things. They had been to Nora's fence 3 times before. First time was a lawyer with papers, polite as church. Second time was Fitch himself, with an offer that was not quite an insult. Third time was Garrick alone, early evening, to make sure she understood what the offer looked like from the other side. She had met him at the door with a shotgun and told him she'd been advised by her late husband, rest his soul, to never let a man with clean fingernails or a scar like that onto her property. Garrick had ridden back to Basin City and told Fitch the widow was going to be trouble. This was the 4th visit. "You had your time to think on it," Garrick said, leaning forward on his saddle horn. "Mr. Fitch has been patient. He ain't a patient man by nature." Nora stood at her fence. She had a canvas apron on. She'd been putting up preserves. There was a smear of something dark on her forearm that she hadn't bothered to wipe. She did not look frightened. She looked the way a person looks when they've been doing hard work and someone has interrupted them. "Mr. Fitch's patience," she said, "is not my problem. It's going to be." Garrick looked past her at the house, at the barn, at the spring line cutting through the pasture. "Pretty place. Shame about the outbuilding you lost last month." That landed. She held still. But it landed. The outbuilding had been a tool shed on the south end of her property. 3 weeks ago it had caught fire in the night. She'd managed to save the tools themselves, hauling them out in her nightgown at 2 in the morning while the structure went up. No one had said it was set deliberately. No one had needed to. Sign the deed over or burn with it, widow. Garrick said it low, like he was ordering coffee. Behind him, Tully shifted in his saddle. Even he looked a little sick about it. Get off my land, Nora said. Garrick looked at her a long moment. Then he smiled, that scar-pulled half-grin. We'll be back, he said. Soon they turned and rode. She watched them until they were small against the evening hills. Then she went inside and sat down at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the wood. She did not cry. She had passed the crying stage some time ago. She was in a different place now, a place with no name she could think of, somewhere between holding on and breaking, where a person discovers what they're actually made of. What she did not know was that a man on the ridgeline north of her property had watched all of it. Had watched Garrick's body language, had watched her feet and her spine, had watched her go back inside. His name, in the sense that he still used it, was Cal Reeves. People who talked about him in the territories used a different name. They called him the Quiet One, which is not the kind of name you choose for yourself. It's the kind of name that accumulates around a person over years of doing something without making noise about it. He was 31 years old. He had a lean, angular face and dark eyes that settled on things and stayed there a beat too long. Black duster coat, a hat worn low. He had the hands of a man who had done physical work all his life, but the stillness of a man who had learned to wait. He was by most measurable accounts one of the 4 or 5 fastest draws in Wyoming territory. He did not advertise this. He was trying, in his way, not to be what he was. He had 3 years of trying behind him now. Before that he had been something else, and before that, before any of it, he had been Callahan Reeves of Sheridan, a 21-year-old cowhand on the Dunmore Ranch who had fallen so completely in love with a red-haired girl from Ohio that he had not known what to do with himself for 6 months. Her name was Nora Brennan, before she was Nora Callahan. They had met at a dance in the church hall in Sheridan in the spring of 1879. He'd been brought by a friend who insisted on going and needed company. She had been brought by the family she was boarding with, recently arrived in Wyoming from Columbus, and not yet decided about any of it. He had asked her to dance, and she'd said yes, and that was the beginning. They were together for most of a year. Not formally. There was no formal anything, but in the way of young people in a frontier town who find each other and hold on. Sunday afternoons, letters when he was out with a cattle drive, evenings on the Dunmore porch when the light went long and gold. She was quick-witted and steady-tempered, and she laughed with her whole face. He had never met anyone like her. He had not been in love before. He had not known it was going to be like that. Like something in your chest you could not quite breathe around. But even then, even at 21, he had been what he was. He'd had the speed in his hands since he was 17. It was not something he could unlearn, and trouble in those years had found him the way water finds low ground. A cheating card player in Casper, a man in Buffalo who had wanted someone else's horse, a drunken Gillette who pulled iron first and regretted it about half a second later. He was not a violent man by disposition, but by circumstance. Violence kept arriving, and he kept responding, and every time he did the ledger got heavier. By the winter of 1879 he had a reputation he had not asked for. And one evening Daniel Callahan arrived in Sheridan from Ohio, a friend of the family Nora boarded with, a good-humored man of 23, with an easy grin and solid prospects, and none of the weight that already rode Cal Reeves's shoulders. Nora had known Daniel from back home. They picked up an old easy friendship fast, the way you do with people who share your past. Cal saw how it was going. He was not stupid, and he loved her enough to understand what he was, which is the hardest kind of understanding there is. He was 22 years old, and already carrying things a young man ought not to carry. He was going to go on carrying them. He was going to be the kind of man who rode into trouble and dealt with it in the only language trouble seemed to understand. And Nora deserved better than to be the woman who sat in a doorway waiting to see if that man came home. He said goodbye to her in March of 1880. He did not explain all of it, because you can't explain all of it when you're 22 and the other person is 20 and neither of you has enough distance yet to see it clear. He said he had to go. She asked him why. He said, "Because staying is the wrong thing for you, even if it doesn't feel that way." She did not believe him. She told him he was a coward. He let her say it. He rode south, then west, then north again in a long, unsteady arc that took 3 years and deposited him, in the late summer of 1883, on a ridgeline in the Bighorn Basin, watching a woman he had not seen in 4 years stand at her fence and refuse to break. He had not followed her here deliberately. That is what he told himself. He had been drifting north after a stretch of work in Colorado, the kind of work you do when you have a certain skill and no strong reason to refuse, and he had come through Basin City and heard the talk at the saloon about Harlan Fitch and the Yellowstone Syndicate and a widow down in Reed's Notch who was holding out. He had not known until he rode the 11 miles south and put his field glass on her fence line that the widow was Nora Callahan, Nora Brennan, the red-haired girl from Ohio. He had not ridden away. He had found a spot on the north ridge where he could see the homestead clearly. He had camped there 4 nights now. He told himself he was still deciding what to do. The morning after Garrick's visit, Nora went out to check her cattle in the east pasture and found one of her fence posts sawed half through at the base. Not all the way, just enough so it would fall the next time a steer leaned on it. She stood and looked at it a long time. Then she went back to the house and got her tools and fixed it herself. Cal watched her do it from the ridge. He came down that evening. He had argued with himself most of the day about it, and he'd lost the argument, or won it, depending on how you look at things. He rode in from the north track, slow in plain view. She was at the woodpile when she heard hooves, and she turned with the hatchet still in her hand. She looked at the rider coming down the track, and for a few seconds neither of them moved. She said his name. One word, like it had been sitting in her mouth for years waiting for permission. He pulled up and stepped down. Nora. She stood and looked at him. He had changed, 4 years older, leaner, something in the eyes that hadn't been there before, but he was the same man. She would have known him anywhere. "What are you doing here?" she said. "Passing through the basin," he said. "Heard about your situation." "My situation," she repeated. "Flat Fitch and his men." He took his hat off. "Saw them at your fence last evening. You were watching." "Yes." She looked at the hatchet in her hand, set it down against the woodpile. "And you rode down to do what exactly?" He did not have a clean answer for that. He said to ask if you needed help. "You rode away," she said, 3 years ago. Four. She looked at him steadily. "I didn't hear from you once in 4 years, Cal. Not a letter, not a word, no. And now you're here because you heard I had trouble." "Yes." She turned away, picked up a split of wood, placed it on the pile with more care than it needed. Her back was to him a long time. Then she said, "Come inside, I'll put coffee on." She told him all of it over the kitchen table, which is to say she told him the facts, not the feelings. The Callahan place, 3 years of work with Daniel, the fever, Daniel's death, the winter she spent alone. Fitch's first approach in the spring, then the second, then Garrick. The tool shed fire, the sawed fence post. He listened without interrupting. He had always known how to be still when it mattered. "The deed's clear," she said. "I own it outright. There's nothing legal Fitch can do." "He's not working legal." "No, he's not." "The sheriff?" She made a short sound that was not quite a laugh. "The sheriff in Basin City has his own office in a building that Fitch's company owns. I tried him once." It was a short conversation. Cal turned his coffee cup. "Garrick's the danger. The other 3 are just hired hands. But Garrick, I've heard the name." "What have you heard?" "That he's a man who finishes what he starts." He set the cup down. "He said he'd be back soon." "That's not an idle threat." "I know it's not." She looked at him across the table. "What I don't know is why you'd put yourself between me and him." He held her eyes for a moment. "Because someone should have, a long time ago." She looked away first. "I'd have to know what I'm dealing with," he said. "If I'm staying, I'd need to the land over. Know where the good positions are. Know your neighbors, if you have any worth counting. Pete Alderman is 2 miles west. He has no love for Fitch, but he has a wife and 4 children. She paused. "I won't ask him to risk that." "No, don't." Cal leaned back. "What about yourself? You ever fire that shotgun at anything that fired back?" "Not yet. Would you?" She looked at him the way she had looked at Garrick. Steady, tired, not quite afraid. "Yes," she said, "I would." He stayed. He camped in the barn the first 2 nights on his own initiative, which was right. She did not tell him to go, and she did not tell him to come inside, and that arrangement suited them both for the moment. The next 4 days he walked every inch of her property. He walked the ridge line on the north, the creek draw on the south, the dry gulch on the east that ran hidden through tall brush. He noted the choke point where the main track crossed a limestone shelf. He marked where a man on foot could move without silhouette. He found the spot behind the spring, thick with willow scrub, where 3 men could wait unseen until they were 20 yards from the house. Nora watched him do it when she could. She did not ask many questions. She understood what kind of knowledge he was gathering. On the 4th night, he sat at her kitchen table and sketched it out, where he thought they'd come from. How many, what they'd try first. Garrick won't ride at the door again, he said. That was the warning phase. If Fitch decides to move, it'll be at night. They'll come from the east and west at the same time. Try to pin you in the house. Set it alight if they have to. How do you know it'll be night? Because Garrick's a man who doesn't want witnesses, and because any serious play in daylight risks someone riding the road and seeing it. He tapped the sketch. They'll come after midnight. Not before 11, not after 2. She looked at the sketch. What do we do? He told her. He spent the next 2 days setting it up. Tripwires of heavy cord strung low across the East Gulch approach, each one tied to a tin can with a handful of gravel. Not enough to stop a man, just enough to announce him. Along the north fence, he pulled several boards loose and reset them so they'd fall inward with a shove, the kind of gap a man pushes through without thinking, which puts him exactly where you want him. At the choke point on the limestone shelf, where the track narrowed to single file, he buried 2 lengths of chain just under the dirt, attached to stakes, in a way that would catch a horse's hoof at a gallop and throw the rider without killing the animal. He showed Nora the system, every piece of it. The gravel cans give us warning, he said. The fence gap channels them. The chain stops a mounted rush before it gets to the yard. He handed her a box of shotgun shells. If they breach the yard, you're on the porch. Not inside. Inside is a trap. And you? He gestured east, toward the dry gulch. I'll be there. She looked at the shells in her hands. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong, he said it flat. Not to reassure her, but because he'd run through the night 100 times in his head, and he'd looked at the numbers, and he believed it. But if something does, you fire twice at the sky. That's the signal. I come to you. She nodded. Then she looked at him, really looked at him, in a way she hadn't let herself do since he rode in. You've done this before, she said. Yes, this kind of thing. Planning it out like this. Yes, she took a breath. Is that what happened? After you left? This is what you became. He was quiet a moment. I was already this when I left, he said. That was somewhat the point. She looked down at the shells, set them on the table, said nothing more about it now. Before we go any further, if you're not subscribed yet, do it now. We're about halfway through tonight's story, and the back half is where it gets good. And tell me, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it where you are? Pour yourself something warm if you've got it. I'll be here. The word that Cal Reeves was at the Callahan place reached Basin City on a Wednesday, which was 8 days after he'd ridden in. It reached there via a drifter who'd stopped for water at Nora's well, had seen the man in the black duster leaning against the barn, and happened to mention it in a saloon that evening because he thought he recognized the face. Harlan Fitch heard it by Thursday morning. He sat in his pipe smoke office and thought about it for a long time. He knew the name Cal Reeves. He knew it in the same way that men in his line of work knew certain other names, not from personal experience, but from the steady accumulation of stories that preceded such men, the way weather preceded a storm. He sent a messenger to Garrick. Garrick came in that evening. He stood across the desk from Fitch with his hat in his hands, and his scar pulling his face into that permanent half grin, and he said, I know who Reeves is. Then you understand the situation. I understand we moved now, before he's ready. Garrick looked out the window at the dark street. If we wait, he'll make the place a problem. He's the type that makes a plan. Can your men handle him? Garrick was quiet a moment. We'll need more than 3. Fitch laced his fingers together on the desk. He did not look pleased. He had budgeted this operation a certain way, and adding men was an expense. But he was also at bottom a practical man. How many? 7 minimum, plus me. A pause. 8 men against 1, and the woman. Another pause. Done, Fitch said. Do it Thursday night. Cal felt it coming on Thursday, the way you feel weather before it breaks. He did not know the night, but he had a feeling, and he had learned over years to respect his feelings in this regard. He told Nora at dusk. She did not blink. Tonight? Maybe. Maybe tomorrow. But I think tonight. He looked at the sky. No moon to speak of. Cloud cover from the west coming in. Good night for it. She set food on the table without being asked, because she understood, as she had come to understand a great many things in the past week, that a man preparing for something like this needed to eat, and needed to do it quietly, without ceremony. They ate together without talking much. The fire in the stove ticked. Outside the wind was picking up. After she washed the dishes, he loaded his rifle and checked it and loaded it again, which is the habit of careful men. And then he sat and checked his revolver and his belt. She watched him from the corner of her eye. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask it. When this is done, when they're gone, what happens?" He set the revolver on the table. "What do you mean? Do you stay?" He was quiet a long time, long enough that she turned from the sink and looked at him. "Nora," he said, "tell me the truth. I'm not asking you to promise anything. I just want to know what you're thinking." He picked up the revolver again, turned it in his hands. "I think about it," he said. "I'd be lying if I said I didn't." He set it down. "But I am what I am, and that hasn't changed. And you deserve—" "Don't tell me what I deserve," she said. Not angry, just clear. "I'm 26 years old. I buried a husband. I've been here alone 2 years. I can decide for myself what I deserve." He looked at her. "I'm not saying stay," she said. "I'm saying don't decide for me, that's all." He held that a moment then. "All right." She turned back to the dishes. At 10 o'clock he went out and took his position in the East Gulch. She doused all the lamps except one in the kitchen window, turned down to almost nothing, enough to make the house look occupied, not enough to throw light on the yard. She sat in the dark with the shotgun across her knees and waited. They came at midnight. Cal heard the first tin can from 40 yards away, a faint rattle from the south approach, not from the east where he was positioned. He adjusted, stayed low, counted, 3 men from the south, moving careful. They'd cut around his wire on the East Gulch somehow or split the group. He moved along the gulch wall, keeping below grade, circling back toward the limestone shelf. The chain trap went off. Before he got there, a horse squealed and a man shouted one word, then silence. That was one down. Cal came up over the shelf edge in the dark. 2 men were on foot now, one of them dealing with a horse that had gone down on its knees. The other had his rifle up and was scanning the darkness. Cal put his voice out there, low and flat. "Lay it down." The man with the rifle spun toward the sound. Cal shot first. The rifle hit the dirt. The man hit the dirt after it, clutching his arm. "On your belly," Cal said. The man went down. The other one, the one with the horse, had his hands up already. "Stay there," Cal told him and moved. From the north fence he heard the sound of boards giving way, the gap he'd built, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. 2 men pushing through, thinking they'd found a weakness. They were in the yard now. That was Nora's ground. She came off the porch at a crouch, and she fired the shotgun into the air once, which is not what the 2 shots meant. One shot was, she was in trouble, but she fired once, and the sound of it in the yard stopped both men cold in a way that a screaming woman or a silent woman would not have. A woman who fires a gun and stays standing has a different quality to her than a woman who runs. "Next one isn't at the sky," she said. One of them ran. The other tried to talk, started to say something about just following orders, which is a thing men say when they are scared, and they are not wrong to say it. Nora held the shotgun on him, and he stayed very still. Garrick came from the west. He had been smart about it. He had not come with the others. He had waited until the shooting started, and then he moved fast and quiet on his own track, coming in along the creek draw where there was no tripwire, where the willows gave him cover, where Cal's positioning had one blind spot. He had found that blind spot the night Nora had met him at her door with a shotgun, when he'd stood there long enough to look the property over before she ran him off. He came through the back of the yard at a walk, and he had a pistol in each hand, and his eyes went straight to Nora. "Put it down," he said. She turned, saw the 2 guns. She did not put it down, but she did not fire either. The man she had covered tried to edge sideways. "Don't," Garrick told him, without looking at him. "Stay where you are." He walked toward her slow. "You're a stubborn woman," he said. "I'll give you that. Get off my land. We're past that." He stopped 6 feet from her. This has gone on long enough. You sign those papers tomorrow or this place burns tonight. Fitch has run out of patience, and so have I. I told you I know what you told me. His voice went flat. Set the shotgun down, Mrs. Callahan. Last time I'm asking. In the willow scrub at the south edge of the yard, something moved. Garrick heard it half a second too late. He started to turn, and Cal's voice came out of the dark 15 feet away. Both of them, Cal said. Drop both of them. Garrick went still. He was good. He was as good as his reputation, but he was also a professional, and professionals run numbers. He had a pistol in each hand. The man in the dark had a revolver already drawn. To get a shot off, he'd have to pick a target and swing, and the man in the dark was good enough to have known that, and good enough to have waited until the angle was right. He dropped the guns. On your knees, Cal said. Garrick went down slow, the way big animals go down, with a kind of controlled reluctance, as if acknowledging it but not accepting it. He knelt in Nora's yard with his hands at his sides, and he looked at Cal Reeves come out of the willows, into the thin starlight. He looked at him a long time. I heard you were in the Basin, Garrick said. Evidently not soon enough. You're the quiet one. Cal stopped 6 feet from him. Drop the name. There's a lot of men between here and Colorado who have a lot of opinions about you, Garrick said. His voice was even. He was a man who stayed even. Fitch is going to hear about this. Fitch is going to hear exactly what you tell him, Cal said. You're going to tell him the Callahan deed is clean and her land is not available. You're going to tell him his man, Garrick, made a judgment call and recommended walking away, and you're going to make him believe it. A beat. And why would I do that? Because I'll know if he comes back, Cal said, and the next conversation I have with Fitch will be different from this one. Garrick looked at him. Whatever he saw there, he held it in his assessment a long time. Then he said, You going to be here then, staying on? Cal said nothing. Garrick's eyes went to Nora. Back to Cal. He seemed to read something in the distance between them. He said, Get your men, Cal said. The ones that are still mobile. Take them out the south track and keep going. Garrick stood, brushed off his knees with an unhurried dignity that was almost admirable. He picked up his guns without being told, holstered them without being shot, and walked to the south fence. Cal watched him every step of the way. He called his men from the dark by name. They appeared one by one, the ones who could walk, 2 in the south, 1 at the limestone shelf, who had been sitting against a rock with his arm bound in his own shirt sleeve. They filed out the south track in a loose, quiet group, and the sound of their horses faded down toward the Basin road. The man Nora had covered last, the one who'd tried to edge sideways, had run somewhere in the preceding minutes. She'd let him go. That was good judgment. She and Cal stood in the yard in the dark. You all right? He said. Yes. She looked around the yard at the boards pulled loose from the north fence, the dark earth churned by hooves. Are they going to come back? Garrick won't, he said. He's done. He made the math and he's done. He holstered the revolver. Fitch might try something different, might try the courts again, try some piece of legal pressure, but without his man and without the option of force, he doesn't have much. Give him a month and he'll turn his attention somewhere else. The syndicate has holdings all across the Basin. He's not going to spend more resources on one piece that fights back. She let out a long breath, looked at the sky. The clouds had broken open some and there were stars. Come inside, she said. I'll put the fire up. He stayed 4 more days. There were things to do, the fence to repair properly, the chain trap to recover, a long slow ride around the property perimeter to look for anything else that needed hardening. He did those things without being asked. On the 4th morning she came out to the barn where he was saddling his horse, and she stood in the door and watched him in a minute. You're leaving, she said. Yes. She leaned against the doorframe. Today, I think so. She was quiet. He went on with the saddle. I meant what I said, she told him. About not deciding for me. I know. He pulled the cinch. But I'm deciding for me. She waited. I'm 31 years old, he said. I've spent 3 years doing the same thing I was doing before I was 25, except with fewer excuses for it. I've got... He stopped. Looked for the right word and didn't find it. A ledger I can't close, he said. Probably never can. That's the truth of it. And I don't want to bring that to your door. You already did, she said, and I'm still standing. He turned to look at her. She was backlit by the morning, red hair, canvas apron, that steadiness that had stopped his breath 4 years ago and stopped it now. "You are," he said. "So maybe your ledger is your business and my door is my business." He held her eyes a long moment, longer than he meant to. "I'm not going for good," he said. "I want to say that, if that means anything." She looked at him. "It means something. I need to." He stopped again. This was not a man who talked around things, but this was a thing with no clean sentence around it. "There's business I left unfinished in Colorado, not the violent kind, the walking away clean kind. I want to go do that and then you'll see," she said. "Yes, all right." She pushed off the doorframe. "Then you'll see." She did not hug him and he did not reach for her. They were past the age of gestures that didn't mean what they said. He led the horse out of the barn, and she stood aside, and he mounted and he looked down at her in the morning light. "Nora, go on," she said. "Not unkind, come back." He touched the brim of his hat, and he rode north out of the yard. She watched him go, until he cleared the ridge and went out of sight. Then she went inside and put the coffee on. "Now I was not there, friend. I want to be plain about that. I'm just an old man who heard this story over years, pieces of it from different mouths in different counties, and I've put it together as best I can. Some of what I've told you may be colored by the telling. That's the way of things. What I do know is what happened after. Harlan Fitch made one more attempt in September, a legal filing in Basin City claiming an easement right over the North Spring. The filing was thrown out by a district court judge in October on the grounds that the deed was clean and the easement claim had no basis. It is generally believed that the district court judge had been advised, by someone or another, that pursuing the matter would be inadvisable. No one has confirmed who that someone was. The Yellowstone Syndicate shifted its land acquisition efforts north of the Basin the following spring. They found easier ground up there. Nora Callahan stayed in Reed's Notch. She expanded the herd by 12 head in the spring of 1884, using a bank loan that she repaid in full by the following December. By 1886, she had a hired man and a milch cow and a kitchen garden that produced more than she could use. So she started selling preserves in Basin City, which is how she came to know half the county eventually. She was 30 years old in 1886, and she ran a good, clean operation, and she did not need anyone's help to do it. Whether Cal Reeves came back, I cannot tell you with certainty. I can tell you that in the late winter of 1885, there were reports of a man in a black duster riding the north track into Reed's Notch on a gray morning, and that smoke was seen from the Callahan chimney for several days after that. I can tell you that whatever he had gone to settle in Colorado, it appeared to have been settled. I can tell you that a neighbor woman riding past the Callahan place one March morning in 1885 reported seeing 2 horses in the corral, which had previously held one. What any of that means, I leave to you. This is the thing about that kind of story, partner, that kind of man and that kind of love. It doesn't often tie up the way a novel does. Real life rarely grants you the clean bow at the end. The moment in the doorway, the word said exactly right. What you get instead is small evidence, read at a distance across time. Smoke from a chimney, 2 horses where there was one, a legal filing that goes away, and the woman who stays, who was always going to stay, who never needed anything but to be let alone to hold what she'd built. She was the constant, she was the land, everything else, the syndicate, the riders, the old love who came back, those were things that happened around her, and she outlasted all of them. The man who rode away once and came back once, if indeed he came back, I believe he found what he was looking for in that, not redemption exactly, something quieter. The knowledge that something he'd done once had been worth doing. That the ledger, while it would never close, had at least one entry on the right side of it. The West was full of men like that, carrying things they couldn't set down, doing what they could with what they had. We don't remember most of them. They didn't ask to be remembered. They just rode the country and did their work, and some of them, if they were lucky and careful and had reason enough, found a place where the riding stopped. If this story meant something to you tonight, if it reminded you that doing the right thing, even late, even imperfectly, still counts for something, I'd ask you to leave a like. It costs you nothing, and tell me where you are in the comments. Tell me what time it is where you are. I'm always curious where these stories reach, and until our trails cross again, partner, keep your powder dry, and your conscience clean as you can keep it. That's all any of us can do. This has been a Wild West story. The names have been changed, the facts have been honored as best I know them, and everything else is the way the fire told it to me. Good night.